your movement in history, Lord. All right, so we started last week. We started talking about Baptists in America, and so today we're going to talk about. We're going to finish up with that. A little bit of Baptists in America, and we're going to talk about what happens afterward. We're going to talk about the First Great Awakening. The first thing that we're going to see when it comes to Baptists in America is this. So between 1639, when Roger Williams organized the First Baptist Church in Providence, and 1700, Baptists grew to 24 churches with 839 members. So what do you think? Does that look like a lot? Not really. I mean, 60 years and yeah. So, well, that was some quick math right there. I didn't even do that. But so it's not. It wasn't a big boost, because the time was marked by infighting over minor doctrines and bitter quarrels. So, one of those reasons is Baptist churches in America had no organized association, no societies for missions, and no evangelism. So, basically, we had talked about the General Baptists and the Particular Baptists of England. And those churches and some of those Baptists are moving over to this new world that England is controlling and dominating, running trade back and forth. So those things are happening, but they're not organized. And we saw that the very first Baptist church was started by a man who probably, we would argue, wasn't even a Baptist. And the views that he had, Roger Williams, the views that he had of basically going Unitarian, and his sympathy for Native Americans and their religion and how it was acceptable to God as well. And then the second Baptist church that was started, we talked about both of these last. Started by Ann Hutchinson, she's not really a Baptist, and later leaves her church for a Quaker church, which they contend to be Unitarian as well. And then she went to go evangelize up north and was never seen again. But the reason they're Baptist is because they're separating from the church that is established here. Okay, so the Puritans are establishing a church. They're establishing a governing body. And it's even to the point where if you're a Baptist, you have to pay taxes to the Puritan church. And so that's the whole argument with freedom of religion, religious freedom is, well, why should we pay taxes and own land in a county or a parish or whatever you want to call it that is controlled by the Puritans, and we have to pay taxes to them when we don't believe in what they believe? Okay, so that's happening at the start of American history. And that's also going to lead to a lot of taxation problems that is going to start a war, I think. Baptist churches, though, they're not organized. They're fighting with each other. They don't know what they believe. They have differences. And then in 1662, Baptists started a halfway covenant. And yeah, that's what it's called. This is what they even called it. And in every history book I looked in and everything I looked up, this is what it's called, a halfway covenant. Here's what a halfway covenant is. This allowed Baptists to baptize their children in the hope that these children would make a future decision for Christ. Okay? Baptists baptize who? Believers. We don't baptize infants because they can't make a profession of faith. So the halfway covenant, because Baptists are dying, their numbers are dwindling, they start this. We're going to baptize our children, which gives them full membership in the church. They are now members of the Baptist church. Because you can't be a member unless you're a believer. And how do you show that you're a believer? You're baptized. And so they started to say, well, we're going to baptize our children, our little infant children, in the hope that they're going to become believers. And a lot of this has to do with some of the taxation that's going on. So if we can boost our numbers, we look better to the others. Okay? And so this bumped the numbers of Baptists in the late 1600s. The Baptists began to control certain towns, and this made them good citizens of their region. They're starting to do what the Puritans are doing. Okay, so you got one church in the town, and nobody else is allowed. Right? We're going to control this area. This is ours. You're going to pay taxes because you live in this area to the church. Right? This is a system set up by the Anglican Church. That was a lot of the taxation went to the church, the state-controlled church. And so that's what Baptists are starting to do. So what this did was cause Baptists to abandon regenerate church membership and religious freedom. What is the Baptist church built on? Those two things. Religious freedom and believers' baptism. You must be a believer to be a part of this. So Baptists start to abandon this. So we're moving into the 1660s, moving towards the late 1600s. And with this halfway covenant, moral people were then considered good and accepted by God. So you do good things, you must be a good person. Because that's what's going to happen, right? Because what happened is those baptized children didn't carry on the faith of their parents. They didn't carry on the same zeal. So the zeal that the Puritans had, that the early Baptists had when they came over to start churches and to build and to do those things, their children didn't do. They didn't partake in that. So now you have members of a church who are not participating at all. And then they have grandchildren or they have children and they're not even baptizing them. Because that's what happens when you make concessions like that. Okay? They didn't even know. Right? Do we see this happen throughout history? Can we name a time that this happened in the Bible? Look at the book of Judges. What happens? We go through, Exodus and Leviticus and we get into Deuteronomy, and then we cross over into Joshua, and we see them take over the land and watch them do amazing things. And what are they told? Tell your children all of these things. And what's the line say? They didn't teach them to their children, and a generation grew up who knew nothing of God. That's going to repeat time and time again when we give concessions and we say, well, that's not really bad, or we don't really have to do it that way. We don't have to practice religious freedom. We don't have to practice regenerate baptism. What happens to Baptists when we don't do those things? We die every time. What happened to the General Baptists? They died out. Why? Because they got away from regenerate baptism. Particular Baptists, same thing. It wasn't until William Carey jumped up and told them to evangelize, go out into the world, that they picked up their numbers again. But eventually, they die out too. Why? Because they forget who they are. So what will happen to us if we forget who we are? Nope. We'll forget who we are, and we will die. So, we're going to jump now to the First Great Awakening. So that kind of finishes up. So what we saw is a generation of Baptists that came in and had zeal and wanted to evangelize, build churches, and do these things. And then a generation came up that didn't do any of those things. Okay? So now we're going to kind of enter the 1700s. All right? And what we're going to learn about the First Great Awakening. All right? So we're going to start from the beginning. Okay? Theodor Freilighausen, German, started reaching people for the Dutch Reformed Church in New York, and his people started to move in closer relationship with God. So this is in 1726. Okay? This man, he has a church in New York. He starts preaching, and something starts happening to his people. Something unexplainable. They want to hear more and more, and they start to crave more and more. And so he's teaching. Okay? And so they're coming into relationship with God. Okay? So I'm not even going to say this name. I'm not even going to try again. Anyway, yeah, I actually almost tried again. He was aided by a Presbyterian preacher by the name of Gilbert Tennent. So Gilbert Tennent, he starts preaching as well. He's there, he hears what's going on, he sees what's going on, and he starts preaching. And people start to go, man, this is great, we want more, we want more. And they start to develop relationship with God. Okay? In 1734, Jonathan Edwards begins winning souls at his Congregationalist church in Northampton, Massachusetts. So Jonathan Edwards, you probably have heard of him. He has a famous sermon called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. The description of this sermon, that when he would preach it, okay, because he preached it more than once. He was a he could travel. He started doing evangelism and traveling from place to place. People are like, hey, we heard that you preached a sermon. People started getting, come over here and start preaching. Okay, it's happening to all of these guys. And so they preach, some of them preach the same sermon over and over again. Okay, it's not unheard of today. I went to we used to call it the evangelism conference. Now it's the advanced conference. But went to the evangelism conference. This guy preached, and it was great. And he's, preaching and going. And at the end, he has this moment where he takes his microphone and he drops it like that and walks off the stage. Okay, it's an impactful moment. Okay, and so those are my glasses, by the way. So the next year, we're at the advanced conference, and this guy's preaching. I'm like, man, this sounds familiar. I've heard this before. And then it dawned on me at the end where he says his point and he goes and walks off the stage. I went, wait, that guy preached that message last year at this conference. And he just didn't mark that he had done it at this conference. So evangelists today, they preach the same message over and over. So he's preaching, And so this sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, the people will talk. There's descriptions of it as they felt like they were sitting in their pews and they just felt like the ground opened up and they could see and feel the fire from the pits of hell just licking at the soles of their feet is the descriptions. I mean, and people were getting anxious and they wanted to give their souls over to the Lord. And so that's some of the descriptions of this sermon. So he starts preaching and people start coming to God. Now, they don't seem, these two events, they don't seem to be linked as one affecting the other, but they start revival in America, okay? So there's no link between Jonathan Edwards and Theodore or Edwards and Gilbert Tennent. Okay, so there's no link between these guys. Now, Tennant and Theodore, they have a link, but Edwards, it seems to be something that God is doing, all right? And so people are wanting to come and know. And these separate revivals begin to spread to the other colonies. So it begins to move from one colony, and they're leaving, they're going, and they're telling other people. And this revival starts to happen. People catching the Spirit. There's this, it seems to be this excitement that's going on. Because not really in America, so I talked about Baptists, but all denominations were kind of feeling it. Okay? They had all, the zeal of the pilgrims and those that were first coming over had kind of died out. And then you're into a third generation of people who are born here now, and there's no zeal to build anything. There's no, desire to expand. And so, but this begins to sweep across the country, okay? So, John Wesley, who is leading a revival in England, hears of the revival in the colonies. So, the Wesleyan revival, or the English revival, is going on at this time. And we talked about that several weeks ago. Okay, so that's happening, and he gets wind that there is a revival happening in they're not the United States, but in the Americas or the New World, and he gets excited about it. And it says he was in awe, is the description, that he became in awe of what God was doing. So he in turn sends George Whitefield. So George Whitefield travels to America to see what is happening and follow up with the work that the Wesleys had left in Georgia. So I had made a mistake a few weeks ago. I told you that they had went to Georgia, that the Charles and John Wesley went to Georgia. It was the state, the colony Georgia, not the country Georgia. I'd said the country. I went back in my slides and corrected that. I don't know why I came up with that when I went back and read what I had read. It just says Georgia, and I'm like, well, it seems like that should be the country. But so they had been at the colonies. Okay, so they had been stateside. I keep saying that they weren't the states yet. They had been over here in the New World and had an experience, and then that's where they had an experience that they were taught, hey, you need to give your life over, and then they go back and they start a revival over in England. Okay, so he gets wind of it, and he sends George Whitefield over to the Americas and also to check in at this orphanage that they had served in Georgia. So Whitefield preaches in the streets of many cities from Maine to Georgia, uniting the colonies, something England was not wanting to happen. England wants to keep the colonies separated. Why? They are easier to control if they're not united. Okay? So England is working really hard to keep them politically separated. But Whitefield, he starts preaching, and he starts preaching north to south. He goes all the way from Maine to Georgia, and he's preaching in the street because now revival is breaking out, right? And so he starts preaching, and Whitefield befriends a man by the name of Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin gives a lot of descriptions about George Whitefield. He says, I don't know how, Benjamin Franklin writes, he said, I'll paraphrase it for you. I don't know how he does what he does. He says you're sitting there talking, listening to him, it's fine. But he goes, I wonder how far away people can hear him. Because there's no microphones, there's no PA system. And he says he walked blocks away and he could still hear the preaching of George Whitefield, even in the hustle and bustle of the city. Okay? That eventually he was like 4, 5, 6 blocks away before he couldn't hear George Whitefield preaching anymore. And so he has an impact, and some claim that George Whitefield in in Philadelphia preached to nearly 30,000 people at one time. Okay? So George Whitefield, who has been part of the revival going on in England, now comes to the Americas and starts preaching here, and revival starts to break out because you have these guys that are preaching, and people are surrendering to God, surrendering to Jesus, and they're also giving their life to Him and giving, which we'll talk about more next week about what happens with all of that. We're just kind of setting the stage here today of what happened. And so this revival starts to break out. Not all were inclined to participate in the sweeping revival. Is that news to you? Sound familiar? If you're paying attention to anything on my Facebook, I'm getting a lot of people going, hey, there's a revival going on in Asbury, Kentucky. Asbury. Okay, Asbury, Kentucky. Okay? Wait, you're not from Kentucky. You're from Tennessee. I know. Yeah. No, I kept thinking, well, you should know. This is where you're from. It's the same state, right? Asbury, Kentucky. Okay? But I'm also getting a lot of this. It's not a revival. It's not a real revival. Be very careful of what's going on. Okay, I'll get into that here in a minute. Okay? But not all are inclined. Some are actually upset. Some of the Congregational church opposed the movement, citing that the revival sermons only contain mere stuff that was marked by a lot of shouting and wild gestures. That's what they're accusing George Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards of. Doesn't contain anything. It's just fluff. It's stuff. And it's just wild gestures. It gets people riled up and excited. That's all that's going on. All right? So what happens is this caused a split in the Congregationalist church into old lights, which is what they called themselves. They were anti-revival, and new lights. These were the people who were pro-revival. All right? I'm watching this play out live on Facebook today. I'm like, this is crazy. Because I don't know what's going on in Kentucky. I mean, I've read a few things, but I haven't participated. I haven't been in there. Okay? I've read a few things. Yeah, it seems like it's something exciting is going on. Okay? They're having a church service that won't stop. It's just 24 hours a day. It's just going and going and going. Okay? Something is happening. So here we have this great awakening. Something is happening. And you have people like, oh, it's just stuff. It's just wild gestures. It's just shouting. All right? So Congregationalists start to divide. So the wave of revival that swept through the colonies in the 1730s and 1740s impacted all denominations, but had its biggest impact on Baptists. What was happening to Baptists when this starts? they weren't doing much of anything. They're dwindling, and they're trying to boost their numbers by baptizing children and making them members. All right? They're not believers, okay? But this revival has a big impact, okay? Because many of the new light congregational churches moved into Baptist life, okay? So by the end of 1790, Baptist churches will expand to 979 churches with 67,490 members and 42 associations. And my slides didn't save. That's awesome. So we're to the end of what I have because it didn't save what I had. For whatever reason, I don't know. So, okay, let me try to fill this in without using the screen then. Okay, that was not everything I had prepared. I'm gonna try one thing here. Maybe, I don't know why that happened. I worked on that so much. Well, I don't know why.
While you're looking, were the Baptists still baptizing children and holding on to those tenets of compromise? When the growth began to happen with the new life people? Did it change their philosophy? Did it change them back to where they're supposed to be?
Okay, so yeah, it's not in there. Okay, so let me go ahead and fill this in. Okay, so here's what happened. So as they start to, because I didn't even, like the whole Baptist portion of that didn't get saved. So as the Congregationalist churches began to pull away, so a Congregationalist church is a Puritan church. Okay, so the Puritans started to go, well, wait a second, we don't want to pay taxes to this Puritans who are opposing us. Okay, so there's a revival going on, and we want revival. It's happening in our church. And so they start to pull away. And then they want to split. And so these congregational churches, you have the New Light and Old Light. In the Baptists, they start to grow a little bit because this wave of revival is coming through. And you have regular Baptists, and you have separate Baptists, okay? Now, the regular Baptists and the separate Baptists, they don't actually split, okay? So the regular Baptists, they're old Baptist style. This is a Baptist church. We don't do that, right? There's no jumping around and singing and all that stuff here, okay? But then the separatist Baptists, or separate Baptists, they say, well, no, this is great. And so you start to have two kinds of Baptists. The problem is there's no associations, there's no denomination, there's no organizational structure, so they don't split. What it seems to be is a social split, okay? So you have the urban churches and the rural, okay? So keep in mind, the Americas are starting to push out west, okay? So we're getting as far as kind of Mississippi, Kentucky is coming about, Tennessee, these lands going that way, Ohio, okay, we're getting to the Mississippi River, okay, so people are moving that direction. Now Oklahoma is all territory, all that stuff is still territory. Okay? But the rural churches seem to catch this wave of revival. The city churches, the urban churches, seem to think they're too sophisticated for it. Okay? And so they don't really catch on to the revival. However, in the Congregationalist church, they have a split because they have an organized structure. Because the Puritans are organizing, they're coming together, and it's the Congregationalist church. And so they start to split. So the New Lights start to go, hey, let's jump over to the Baptist church and declare autonomy and religious freedom. And so they start to move and go into Baptist life. So now you have these separate Baptists and these Congregationalists who are experiencing this revival, and so they start to come together and they start to participate together. Well, when they're participating together, they come across this difference. The Congregationalists, because they're Puritans, they're Calvinists, they baptize infants. The separate Baptists don't. And so there's this vote, even though nobody really opposed it or voiced any opinion, this vote comes because they have council after council after council meeting to try to pull these two churches together, but coexist together with their difference of belief. But it gets voted down. And it never comes to fruition, these. And so these churches, Congregationalists, they can't be Puritan anymore. They're getting thrown out. They start to move and they say, okay, what does it take to be a Baptist? Well, you have to be a believer. And so they start baptizing these Puritan preachers into the Baptist faith and say, well, if you're going to participate in Baptist, then you're going to have to do this. Okay, so in New England, this is happening. Now we move south. So in the south, you have these two churches, that the denominations that split, okay, or the Baptists that they actually do split in the south. So Virginia down through Georgia, Mississippi area, moving that direction, they split. And when they split on the grounds of class and kind of what are we going to accept revival or not? Okay, and so some of the more urban churches still don't accept it, but some of the smaller rural churches, they accept this revival that's going on. They're catching part of this, and so they have a split. Now, in that situation, who's going to win out? The old fuddy-duddies or the exciting church down the road? Okay? So that's what's going to happen. So this people start flocking to this church. So the regular Baptists start to go to the separate Baptists in the south, and they say, hey, we should join together. We should come together. To which the separate Baptists say, sure, that's awesome. But you're going to make some concessions if you do. Revival is happening. We're going to do missions. We're going to do evangelism. We're going to do all this stuff. The regular Baptists say, okay. They come together and they form what we call the Southern Baptist Convention.
Now, at that point in time, the separate Baptists, were they still okay? They still said only, or no infant baptism?
So both Baptists are not, they're the believer's baptism. So they did, but when revival happens, they start to get back to their roots. And they start to go, yes, we have to be Baptists, okay? So what I give you is like a blip of about like 20 or 30 pages of a history book, okay? And then when I say a history book, I mean like 4, okay? And they each contain, so I'm hitting really the highlights of all of it. So what happens is a lot of these councils, the Baptists start to grow so fast that they go, well, wait a second, we need to start to organize. And so different states start to organize, and people start leading things, and they start to form associations, okay? So then you get, especially in Kentucky, where you have an association that forms, but they have disagreements, and so they split into different associations, but enough agreement to where they form a convention. Okay, so the state comes together, but it has 3 associations. We still do this today, right? We're part of the Southern Baptist Convention, which is an overall global network. But we're also part of the Oklahoma Baptist Convention, which is our state. So it covers our state. And then, but we're also part of an association of like-minded churches that are in Potawatomi and Lincoln County. And so we have that cohesion. All right, so these practices that they're putting together are carrying over to today. Okay, so when these two churches come together, when these two sides in the South come together, they form the Southern Baptist Convention, what will become the Southern Baptist Convention. Okay, that's not quite what they called it, but that's what it's going to be. And so that starts the roots of where we're at today, is based in the 1700s and the First Great Awakening. And what we saw is we see that these churches grow to like 64,000 people in the span of 100 years. Okay, that's an incredible growth. And that's all attributed to the Great Awakening, the First Great Awakening that happens, and people catching this vision of what's going on. So this would have taken a lot longer had my slides not gotten erased. I don't know if I closed it without saving it. I thought I usually always save it, so I don't know what happened. But I'll have to figure that out. So, but good news for you, we get to get out early. But I'm going to have a few discussion questions for you, because I had some at the end, and I want to see if I can try to remember them. Okay? What is revival? What does that mean?
Revival is whenever a believer comes back to the belief or gets energized again on the belief. It's not a non-believer becoming a believer. That's my understanding is it's not a non-believer becoming a believer, but a believer getting back to his roots.
Okay.
That's what I've understood.
Okay. There's no wrong answers.
Because you're reviving what was there. Bringing back to life. Yeah.
Okay. So is that how you would determine? Well, a revival is bringing back to life. Put that in a spiritual church context, and let's elaborate. Because if I drop dead here and you bring me back to life, you could say that that's a revival. So in the context in which we are talking.
But we're not a revivalist church right now, so we wouldn't bring you back.
Oh, we're currently not in revival, so you're dead. Okay.
It's a time for the church to come back. It really, we often focused on evangelism and bringing the lost in to be saved.
Okay.
That's good. But most of the time, it's to bring the church back to the life it's supposed to have, which would include evangelism, missions, giving, Bible study. It brings us back to our roots and restarts us. That's the way to say it.
Okay. So revival brings us back to our roots and restarts us. Okay.
Revival is a change of heart, because revival starts here
Okay.
with me.
Okay. So revival is change of heart. So what makes the Great Awakening? They call it a revival. Okay? So what makes it a revival? Okay? So evangelism is part of revival. Okay? So it's people catching new life, change of heart, going out and sharing the gospel, telling people. Okay? Which is why I'd be very cautious as to right now. Maybe what's happening in Kentucky, I don't know if it's a revival or not. Will we see if it is? It's only been going for a few days, so we're talking about the Great Awakening happens 10 years. 20, the 30s and the 1730s and the 1740s. Okay? So it's a process. Okay? At least that with the Great Awakening.
Well, maybe you have small revivals, then you have greater revivals. I mean,
Okay.
the Great Awakening would have been like I said, a 20-year
Mm-hmm.
span, whereas the Asbury maybe it'll grow to that, but it may just be a smaller revival in there, because there are different times when I've heard of revivals happening in different places
Okay.
over the years. So
Okay. Okay, new life into the church. Definitely happened with the Baptists. All right. Happened with the Congregationalists. All right. So, what happens? What happens to churches that are engaged in revival?
they're more energized, and they to do what they should have been doing all along.
Okay.
I guess it's
Good.
the only way I can think of it. Passion might fit that.
They're potentially growing.
Okay. Growing.
There's repentance involved.
Yeah.
We see that a lot. We see that a lot in the Old Testament. We're reading about some of it now. Oh my goodness, I've sinned against God, but I need to repent. And so we become aware of sin. We become aware of how far apart we have gone. The fellowship's been broken. So it's to restore that fellowship. When we do that, we're going to do a lot of things.
Okay.
Become obedient.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So when I going through this, I'd gone through it a while back ago. I'd read a lot of this information, but when I'm putting it together over the last several days, what's happening, it's just remarkable to me that we're doing this as something is going on, that people are talking about. And we've been talking about it on Sunday morning about revival, because we're going through that book of A.W. Tozer. And looking at what he said about revival, and then it starts to happen. But one of the things that has to happen in order for revival is you're going to have people who catch it. It has to be people who catch hold of it, because like I said, I give you just a little bit of what I'm reading, because there are often individuals who get it, but the people around them don't, and they get kicked out and they get thrown out. Okay? These churches start to crumble because of what's going on. They separate themselves, and there are many who started preaching against what was happening, against George Whitefield and and Jonathan Edwards. Okay, they start preaching against these guys. I gave you a little bit, but I'm going to tell you, watching what's going on in Kentucky, I've got pastor friends of mine who are posting articles saying what you need to know. This is stuff. This is fluff. It's not real. It's just a bunch of hoopla. It's jumping around. It's shouting. It's the exact same thing. And I mean, it's almost dictated word for word as I'm reading these articles that my friends are posting. I'm going to be honest. I'm kind of on the fence. I don't know what's going on. But I'm not going to discredit it and say, oh, what you have to know about it.
Would you discredit what happened in the late 40s and the early 50s with the Billy Grahams and some others that started off with tent meetings and did that kind of thing? Would you discredit that? See, I know there were people that's a bunch of hokey.
There's a lot of people that said that Billy Graham was not for real, but millions of people got saved. Was there a lot of false converts? Yes, I'm sure there was a lot of people that went down at the Crusades and prayed prayers and left and said, well, I must be okay. But I have heard so many stories of, I got saved at a crusade and I'm still on fire for Jesus. I saw that so many times.
And when you take a look at the model, and I'll just use him, take a look at the model of what he has, he just didn't come in and set up a tent and sit out there and just 5 people show up the first night and 10 the next.
Right. He wasn't Brother Love's traveling show.
No, he wasn't. But what he did is
He developed a network.
of putting the churches at work and preparing for it. Much like, what was it,
Blackburn.
that did the evangelism explosion thing. It came out in the 70s with that, and we participated in that here.
Mm-hmm.
Where there was a whole process of what you had to do. The church had to decide if we're going to do it, we're going to devote a weekend to it.
Mm-hmm.
Friday night, we're going to meet and we're going to do this. Saturday, we're going to meet and we're going to do this. Sunday, we're going to meet and we're going to do this. And Sunday night, we're going to meet and do this. And we devoted those times to coming together and praying and all. There wasn't fellowship and card playing. And then we went out and visited on Saturday. We invited, we brought back. Sunday morning, we had a service with a full congregation and all the people around. And then Sunday night, the church came back together and prayed again. And that was a weekend of evangelism explosion.
Mm-hmm.
Because he triggered on the part of the Great Commission that said, I will give you dynamite.
Right.
I will give you power.
Right. So,
And so there was a model built for that. I'm not saying the same thing as Billy Graham did, but if you could take a look at it, they laid this thing out. And I see some of that in this.
well, you're going to see a lot of it next week.
Just remember that.
Right. I'm going to make sure that they're saved this time. I'm going to baptize them, so make sure they're saved. Well, we're dunking it. We're Baptists. We're dunking it. Got my flash drive. Saved.
I don't understand these people who are being critical of what's going on there. I mean, after all, who am I
Mm-hmm.
to judge whether that's...
So, well, here's the problem that you're going to see today, and it's the same thing that they did then, okay? They're getting away from sound doctrine, is what they're going to claim. So that's what they're saying. It's mere stuff. And I thoroughly believe that one of two things is happening. One, you have preachers that are very concerned about doctrine, and we can't get away from that. Two, you have preachers who have preached and preached and preached until they're blue in the face and nothing happens. And then you have somebody who preaches and thousands upon thousands. There is jealousy among preachers. There is very much. When I'm at a convention and I'm talking to people, first question they ask me, how big is your church? I never ask people that. I never do. How are things going in your church? Well, good. I never ask them how many. A lot of times they'll tell me, but I never go, well, how many are you running? But it happens almost the very first when people ask me, well, how many people are in your church? Why? Because they want to know. We're gonna compare. We're gonna say, yeah. I have.
Are you worth my time?
Oh, that has actually happened to me. I won't tell you the preacher's name because if I told you, you would know it. But I was standing in a circle of a bunch of guys who were preaching or who were talking. We're all preachers. Some of them I know, some of them I don't, but we're all just talking. And one of the megachurch pastors walks up, and he's like, "Hi, hey, how are you? How are you?" He looks over, and I've got my name right here and where I'm from. He sees it, walked away. Did not even greet me. And I'm going to tell you, I have met him and talked to him several times. And I was like, all right, if that's the way we're going to be, fine. But
Well, it's not about you.
it's not. It's not about him either.
No.
But he didn't recognize the church I was at. And so I wasn't. And that was this church. I guess. I'm pretty sure that if I was, I don't know, running 200 in Bartlesville, he might have done the same thing. But, I mean, it's just, that's the way it is. But there is a lot of jealousy among pastors. I was in a discussion, this is way beyond I was in a discussion one time. This was before I came here. So we're 6 years ago. I'm in a discussion, and these pastors they're frantic, and they're going, "How are we going to reach millennials? How are we going to reach millennials?" And I looked at them and I said, "If you don't have them, you're not getting them. They're already going somewhere else. You need to be talking about how you reach Generation Z. That's the generation you need to start reaching. Millennials, if you don't have them, they're not coming." And they got really mad at me. They started yelling at me. And they're like, "Oh, we can grow. We're going to get them." I'm like, "You're not going to get them. You don't have them. You're not getting them. But the church down the road has all of them." And they're like, "Well, we need to be like them." Nope, you don't need to be like them. You need to be you. And you need to go after the group of people that you can reach. Because that's the truth. If we're going to have a revival, our church is going to be in a unique position, okay? People that are going to buy these houses that are going in, they're going to be my age, okay? We're going to have to figure out how to reach them. So millennials, I'm going to go back on my word here a little bit. We're still going to have an opportunity to reach them. But remember, if they are going to Quail Springs Baptist Church and move out here, they will still drive to Quail Springs Baptist Church to go to church. Okay? So we're going to be in a unique situation, but we need to start talking about Generation Z, who is now 20 years old and going into the workforce. That's the generation that has to be reached. Millennials are 40 years old now. Right? They're grown. They're already made their decisions. They're where they're going to be. And you guys know 90% of people who make a profession of faith do so before the age of 18 years old. 90%. If they haven't made a profession of faith before the age of 18, it's hard to get them. So, but revival can happen.
I think your biggest thing that you got to make sure that you don't ever get away from, and I think a lot of churches do this, is it's got to be the fluff and the stuff to bring them in. It's not.
No, I know.
Preach the word. The word's got to be solid.
Preach the word. Well, that's the big issue. All right, so we'll be dismissed, and I'll try to figure out if I can recover my slides. That was really, I was looking at that, I was like, the next slide should be there. I don't know what happened. I might have unplugged my flash drive without ejecting it. That's probably what I did. Anyway, and once I brought it up, the autosave's gone, isn't it? Yeah. So that was a good 2 hours worth of work down the drain. Actually, it's not down the drain because I still had the information in my head and I was able to tell it to you, a lot of it. But let's pray and we'll be dismissed. Father God, we thank you for this time. We thank you.